Good evening, everyone. My name is Melanie Kakwich, and it's great to be here with all of you tonight at the United Democratic Volunteers of Alabama Blue School. Tonight, I have the honor of introducing someone who has been deeply engaged in strengthening civic participation here in Alabama, Elizabeth Anderson. Elizabeth has worked to encourage more everyday people to get involved, stay informed, and build real community connections around the issues that matter. Her session tonight, How to Connect with Your Neighbors Politically, is especially important in a time when real conversations can make all the difference. Please join me in welcoming Elizabeth Anderson.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. I will share my screen so everyone can see my presentation. All right. So I put this presentation together because I know how hard it is to talk to people when you're talking about politics, but it does not have to be negative. It can be a very positive, hopeful thing. So I'm going to share some practical advice to help you have some of those conversations. If you are, like many of us, dreading going into Thanksgiving and worried about some of the conversations that might happen there, I'm very hopeful that this is going to make you feel a little bit better about it because I promise it sounds so scary to talk about politics with people, especially when you're in a super red state like Alabama, but it is not scary at all. I'm going to tell you how to do it without feeling so worried. All right, so just to kind of talk about who I am for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm an Alabama native, I'm a mom, I'm a small business owner, and I'm a Democrat running for U.S. Congress in a Republican stronghold district. I'm running against Gary Palmer. This district did not have anybody run as a Democrat from 2018 to 2024 when I ran for the first time. So you can imagine people consider it to be very red. I talk to Trump voters and very, very right-leaning people all the time. And a lot of those people ended up voting for me, which is really nice. So I'm going to tell you all of my secrets for how to talk to, Trump voters, very right-leaning people, how to have positive conversations, and just in a way that feels really honest, really humane, and that is actually useful to people. It's not about arguing, so we're not here to necessarily win arguments on a one-on-one basis with people. What we're here to do is build relationships with people and build a pro-democracy majority here in our red state. And it's going to take some work from everybody here. I do want to start by saying that it's okay if you feel some discomfort about having these conversations. It's normal to feel nervous. You've probably been told stuff like, "We don't talk about politics or religion." That's a very common thing. But the people who benefit from that silence are extremists. And they want you to feel like that, but we're not going to feel like that. We're going to feel good and positive about these conversations. And like I said, I do this all the time. I talk to people all over the political spectrum, and I promise, 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 it does not have to be scary. All right, so the first thing that I'm going to ask everyone to do when you are getting ready to have these conversations, before you even have a conversation with somebody, whether you call yourself a Democrat, a progressive, a leftist, a moderate Republican, a centrist, whatever you label yourself as, you might have been made at some point in the past to feel bad about your values or your political leanings. I know that some of us have requested a Democratic ballot when we're voting in the primary, and someone gave you a snotty look. You might have read the comments in AL.com on Facebook. It's a bad idea. Don't do it. But I said all that to say that sometimes in some of these super deep red communities, sometimes we are made to feel bad or ashamed of our politics. And, we're made to feel bad about caring about poor families or about racial injustice or about LGBTQ rights or unions or public schools or reproductive rights. And none of those things are anything that we need to be ashamed about. Okay, those are our moral values. That is what we feel on the inside, and that's what's in our hearts. So we don't need to feel bad about any of that. So if you're going into these conversations and you feel embarrassed to be a Democrat, I need you to let that go. That is not serving you, those feelings, okay? That's serving other people. That's not serving you. So let go of any feelings that you have that are negative or that you feel shy or scared about your own political values. And I want you to reclaim your pride in those things. That's important. That's who you are, okay? And if you have ever felt alone in some of these things, which I know a lot of us have felt alone, especially in Alabama, and if you're hiding your values, how will other people know that they're not alone, right? How are they going to find you? And how are you going to connect together? And I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but when I decided to run in District 6, I said, I heard so many people say things like, don't even bother. It's 100% red. And that is literally not true. You know, there are lots of left-leaning people in District 6, but when we let ourselves believe, well, there's nobody else like me, or, I feel bad about this stuff, that's not serving anybody except for the people who want it to be 100% red, right? So let go of any negative feelings that you have about it and be proud. Be proud of yourself. Like I said, wherever you call yourself on the political spectrum, be proud of where you stand. The next thing I want to talk about is while we're reframing here, I want us to reframe what political means. Okay, everything is political. Politics is around us every single day of our lives. It's how we address our social problems. It's how we make a society that works for everybody. It's how we think about the issues that we individually face and that we're collectively facing. Politics, right, is for the people, by the people. It's how we live, it's how we interact with each other. And it's especially important for marginalized people who cannot ignore it. There's not an option to not be political if you are in a marginalized community. And politics does not just have to mean an electoral contest or a screaming match on cable news or, who's running for president next year or extremism. Politics is whether your hospital locally stays open, whether you have adequate health care, whether your kid has a school nurse, whether they're safe at school, whether you're discriminated against in your job. It's hospital closures, quality public education, expensive groceries, literally your job. Every single thing is politics. If it touches your kitchen table, your paycheck, your school, or your doctor, politics is involved in that. Okay, so we're reframing it and we're understanding now that everything is political. So if we are quiet about this stuff and we don't, talk about it, who does it help? It helps extremists, right? And here's what I mean. When people are saying things like, I don't like to talk about politics, what they actually mean is, I don't want to argue. I don't want to lose my friends and family. All this online stuff feels angry and hopeless and ugly. The AL.com comments hurt my feelings today. That's what they mean. Okay. So people stay really quiet about it. And when we're quiet about it because of those reasons, then who wins and who's the loud voices are the extremists. And then people assume that those voices are speaking for everybody, right? If all you're hearing and all you're seeing is those extremist voices because everybody else is too afraid to speak up, then that's what we all assume that everybody is. And that's just not the case, right? Because when the rest of us are being quiet, that agenda is getting set by the people who want to ban books and take away health care and, line the pockets of billionaires at the expense of everybody else. But what I'm telling you is, and I promise this is true, that politics does not have to be negative. We can really make it about problem solving and we can make it about our shared values because we all deserve a say in what is happening in our lives. And when we're talking to each other and we're actually communicating with each other, what you'll find is that a lot of us agree more than we disagree. We're a lot closer than we might think we are on a lot of these issues. So conversation and talking about these things, I personally feel like is a responsibility that we have as citizens in any democracy. So we have to make sure that all voices are heard. And in order for that to happen, we've got to vote, but we've also got to talk, right? And we've got to advocate. So I told you, made a bunch of promises that I was going to tell you how to not make it weird. And I'm going to really tell you how to not make it weird. So it does not have to be awkward. I have had like 1 million political conversations in the past couple of years, just because I ran for office and I made a concerted effort to make sure that I was talking to people across the entire political spectrum. A lot of times as Democrats, the consultants are telling you, hey, only speak to Democrat voters. And I didn't want to do that because I think that everybody needs to be heard. And I think that our representatives need to hear from everybody and they need to represent everybody in the entire district. So I had all these conversations with people, and I mean, a lot of conversations, and they were overwhelmingly not weird. Like some of them were weird. I'm not gonna lie. There was some real weirdos, but the majority of those conversations, like the overwhelming majority, 99% of those conversations were not even remotely weird. They were really nice, positive conversations. So here's the tricks, okay? Here's how you do it. The first thing I want you to do is take a deep breath and be confident. Like we talked about, we're not ashamed of our political values. We're confident. We feel good about it. And when we're having these conversations, we're not trying to ambush people, right? We're inviting them into a conversation about their own lives and their own government because politics is everything, right? The next thing we're going to do after we take a deep breath and we feel really good about this and we feel really confident is we're just going to bring it up. And you don't have to make it weird. You don't have to be like, hey, have you heard about this hot button political issue, right? But you can also look for opportunities to bring it into the conversation sometimes when it is a topic that's coming up naturally. So, something that happened to me is last year I was super, super sick with COVID. Actually had to go to the ER. It was horrible. Do not recommend it at all. It was the worst. But while I'm laying there dying in the waiting room for 1 million hours, which is again a policy choice that we make. So I'm in the waiting room for like 1 million hours, and this lady next to me starts talking about, we were just chit-chatting about some things, and she was telling me that she had an aneurysm a couple years ago, and she ended up having to file for bankruptcy just because her medical bills were so high, and she was out of work for a long time, and she didn't know what to do, and it was just a really, really scary time for her. And so I picked myself up and I thought, what a great opportunity to talk about healthcare reform. Now, if you're in the ER, please do not feel compelled to do it this way. But she and I had a really great conversation about reforming our healthcare system so that people don't have to file bankruptcy, due to their high medical bills. And we talked about how that's so beneficial to her, but also to her kids because, she was there with one of her children, her adult children, and she was stressed because she couldn't help her adult child with these medical bills that she knew was going to come out of this ER visit. And this was just a really stressful time for her. So we talked about how important it is to decrease our medical bills and what policies we need to do to advocate for to do that. And so we had a great conversation, and it wasn't weird at all. I am completely confident that that woman was 100% on the other side of the aisle from me. But we had a fantastic conversation, and I didn't feel good. She had been there for a long time and was frustrated, but it was a really positive conversation, and we really connected with each other. And I heard a lot of her story, and I felt great about it. So like I said, you don't have to do it when you're in the ER. But if, for an example, if somebody is complaining to you about how many glue sticks they had to buy in August because their kid was going back to school, there's a great time to ask them if they know who's running for school board or if they know how their school gets funding, because a lot of times they don't. And it's good to just bring this into conversation periodically because it is, again, it is politics, right? And a lot of people don't realize that some of that stuff is politics. They're not always thinking about it as politics. They're thinking about it sometimes as just this horrible thing that's happening to them. So help them realize some of these things. So bring it up, right? Sharing people's frustrations like that is a really great way to connect with people because a lot of times you're mad about the same things, right? You don't like to buy all those glue sticks either. All right. And this is the part where you start commiserating people with people is where you're going to be really surprised at how much you agree with people on things. Like me and the lady in the ER guarantee you that we're on opposite sides of the aisle, but guess what? We really hate medical bills. You know, and so this is where I mean, seriously, that you are going to find that you agree more than you disagree on a lot of things. And this is your opportunity to connect. All right, next, we're going to listen to what they're really saying. When they say, I hate politics, we're going to listen to what they're saying. They're saying that they hate all the arguing. They're saying that they hate all the negativity, that they hate the dishonesty that goes on in the political spaces. And guess what? You hate it too, right? You can just keep commiserating about that. And so there are lots of things that you can say about that. You can say, hey, I get it. I understand. I totally feel you. A lot of what we're seeing on TV is so nasty, and I'm not interested in that kind of drama either. I just care about things like decreasing our medical bills, right? And making sure our kids have all the supplies that they need at school and making it a little bit more fair for people. And you can also ask them things like, well, if you could fix something about politics, what would it be? And let them talk. And then what you're going to do is you're going to listen to the wise words of this wonderful philosopher from the 90s, Vanilla Ice. Right? He said it's time to stop, collaborate, and listen. So we're going to do that. We're going to listen to people. Just let them talk. People want to be heard. You don't have to have an argument. You can literally just sit there and listen to somebody. And sometimes they might say something that's kind of out of pocket. And you're going to take that opportunity to remember that not everybody has access to the same information as you, and they don't know everything about every issue. So we're going to try to listen to what they're really saying and what's really bothering them about this stuff. Because every time you talk to somebody, you get to choose whether to have an argument with them. So you bring this power to the conversation. And if you want them to listen to you, then you have to listen to them first, right? So this is where we bite our tongues and we listen, and we don't listen for what we disagree on. We are going to listen really hard for what we do agree on. And I'm going to give you an example of that time I converted a Trump voter. And I'm telling you, this works, okay? This absolutely works. So last year on election day, I went to all of the polling locations and I talked to voters, which I highly recommend doing on election day so you're not on the news all day and you're just talking with people. It was a great experience. I talked to just random people in the line, people I agreed with, people I disagreed with. It was really a fantastic way to get in touch with all of the people in this district. But I talked to this one guy and I walked up to him and I didn't know anything about this guy, right? And I said, hey, I'm Elizabeth Anderson. I'm going to be on your ballot today. Here's my card. I hope I have your vote. And I said, what kind of issues do you care about? And he told me a couple of things. And he said, well, what kind of issues do you represent? And I said, well, my number one issue is maternal health care because I live in Shelby County and we were in Shelby County. And I said, we're the wealthiest county in Alabama and we do not have a maternity ward in this entire county. And the guy said, oh my God, I'm so glad you said that. My wife just had a baby 2 months ago. It was so scary. We had to drive a very long distance during rush hour traffic to get to downtown Birmingham. It took us like an hour to get there. We were so scared the entire time. Like we had wanted to have our baby over at Shelby Baptist, and we couldn't do it because it has the maternity ward closed. We had to go all the way downtown. It was this really long way. And so he and I just talked about this maternal health care crisis that we have going on in Alabama and how we don't have maternity wards. When we get to the end of the conversation, this guy says, no politician has ever talked to me about an issue that like I so deeply care about. That's like something that's really happened in my life. I've just never had this experience where, a politician was talking about something that really happened to me before. And he was like, I'm so excited. I'm going to go in here and vote for you. Like, I can't wait. And so I saw him later on and he came out. He's like, I just voted for you. It was really fun and exciting. But when he walked away from me, one of my campaign staffers said, Did you see that guy's shoes? And I said, No. What was on his shoes? And she showed me a picture that she took, and he had on MAGA shoes. Okay, like straight up MAGA shoes. And I said, well, if I had not taken the time to talk to that guy about what he cared about and what I cared about and where we connected, like he would not. He would have voted straight ticket Republican when he got in there, right? But we talked, we had a good conversation, and I converted a Trump voter. All right. So you can do that too. Like I don't have a special superpower of doing that. Anybody can do that. And what I want you to take away from that conversation that I had was it was so positive. I didn't change who I was politically. I didn't dilute my message. I didn't pretend to be someone I wasn't. But I didn't change who he was politically either necessarily. Like he still cares about the same issues that he cared about before that conversation. But we connected. We talked about real life issues. We didn't talk about party labels. We didn't talk about, who is on the top of the ticket. We talked about this is an issue that is impacting you in your real life. And that guy thought about it that day. Do you know what I mean? And then that guy ended up voting for me. So we got an extra vote just from having that little conversation. I mean, we probably talked for 5 minutes, and it truly was. It was a great conversation. And so when I tell you it's possible to have conversations and then be positive with people on the other side of the aisle of you, I mean that from the bottom of my heart because I've done it so many times. So when you are having these conversations, I know that you might be thinking, okay, sure, maternal health care, like that's the softball. Like everybody wants their moms and babies to be healthy when they're born, right? Like everybody wants that. Part of that is, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. We totally agree on like 90% of the issues. Okay, we really, really do. But I'm acknowledging at the same time that there are hot button issues. Okay, there's some stuff that's going to come up from time to time in these conversations. This is going to be an argument, and let me tell you how to get around that. So what we're going to do when the culture war issues come up, because it will happen, is we're not going to panic. Okay, right wing extremists push these culture war issues and they win on them because they're abstract. Okay. So when we're talking about issues like trans rights, most Alabamians do not know a trans person. So that makes it a very easy way for extremist politicians to come in and make trans people the villain in that story. Because if you talk to somebody, in rural Coosa County, they probably do not know a trans person. And it's easy for right wing extremists to villainize that and make them feel afraid. Okay. Even better for the right wing extremists, they know that you're going to argue about that issue. And they know that as soon as you start arguing about those issues with somebody, that person's going to double down and you've lost them. So people get stuck on these culture war issues because they are emotional. And it's really a brilliant marketing trick from the extremists because that immediately creates us versus them. And they think back to all those scary things that they've been told, and it's very, very hard to break. So there's an art to this. When you're having these conversations, you're going to have to stay calm and confident. And we can do this together. We're going to turn down the heat, and I'll tell you how we're going to do it. Before I get into it, I do want to say, first and foremost, we are not going to ever throw any community under the bus. Okay? Never, ever, ever. We are going to fight for the rights of our community members, our neighbors, and our friends, no matter what. But what we're also going to do is we're going to turn down the heat. Okay? And that's a way that we're going to keep fighting is by turning down the heat. So we're going to remember that politicians are using those issues to drive a wedge between people and their communities, and they're using them to distract people from what's really hurting them. So to combat that, we're going to turn down the heat. Okay? Turn down the heat on the culture war issues and turn up the heat on the kitchen table issues. So, what that means is we're going to have to approach people where they are. We're going to have to approach them with kindness and curiosity. Even if we disagree with them, we're not going to argue about the culture war issues. What we're going to do instead is we're going to redirect. We're going to redirect them from the culture war fights that are really abstract to them, and we're going to get them focused on material concerns that are impacting their actual everyday lives. Like, what do they care about? What is impacting them right now? Where can we find common ground? Groceries are expensive. Okay. Let's talk about that. Can't find housing. Okay. Rent's going up everywhere. That's what we're going to try to redirect people and get them into these material issues and get them out of the abstract. And again, of course, we are always going to continue standing up for and fighting for marginalized groups. Of course, we're going to vote for policies that protect our most vulnerable people in our communities. Of course, we're going to use our voices and our actions to advocate for people. But during this conversation, we're going to help that other person find an entry point into progressive politics that we can help them get into it and keep them in the conversation because we want them to get there, right? They might need a little bit longer journey to change their views on some of the hot button issues, but they're not going to start the journey if we slam the door in their face, if that makes sense. We're going to call people in and not call them out at this point. And it's okay to acknowledge that you don't agree with them. It's okay to say, hey, you know, we're never going to see eye to eye on banning library books. We're never going to see eye to eye on abortion. But what about maternal health care? So we're going to find some common ground with them because it will make a difference. Because once we get them talking about maternal health care, maybe one day we are able to have the conversation with them about abortion, but we will never have that conversation with them about abortion if we don't start where we agree with them. So again, it feels scary, but fight the urge to just get into an argument with people because that is what the right-wing extremists want you to do. They are dying for you to come and argue with folks about the culture war issues. Oh my gosh, you're making their day when you start arguing about this stuff with them. But if we can slip in, we're going to Trojan horse it, okay? Right? We're going to start with things that we all agree on, and we're going to turn down the heat because that also serves marginalized communities. It's very easy for people to continue attacking marginalized communities when the heat is all the way up. So we're going to turn it down. And when I say we're going to listen for shared concerns, I mean that truly. When you are talking to people, you are going to find, I've said this again and again, you agree a lot more than you disagree. So even if you disagree on something really big, there are like 10 other things that you agree on that are super important. Republican women, for example, they care about access to OBGYNs. They don't like it any more than we do that there are no maternal wards and maternity wards in Shelby County. Okay. The Republican women of Shelby County do not like that we don't have access to maternal health care in this county. Okay. They also want IVF. The farmers, they are really concerned about rural hospital closures. They want broadband access. They want tariffs. These are things they want to get rid of tariffs. These are things that we all agree on. Okay. If you have veterans, they want to have a fair shot at employment opportunities. They want better mental health care. Seniors, they're scared of losing Social Security and Medicare. The parents, lots of parents out there, if their kids have disabilities, they want to make sure that we have education funding for that. You know, everybody wants our kids to be safe in schools from gun violence. We agree on all of this stuff. You're not going to find someone who's like, you know what? I don't care at all about maternal health care. Let them die. No one's going to say that, okay? We agree on this stuff. We all agree on this stuff. So find where we agree. Most of us want the same exact thing. And when you hear people say that they want these things, come back to empathizing and commiserating and understanding. You say out loud, I feel that way too. and that's where you connect. All right, so these are all the ways to engage, but there are also times when you do not engage. All right, there's times when we put up the stop sign and walk away. All right, there is going to be a point when you have to protect your peace and your boundaries, and that's okay. So if you are in a conversation, which I can't even think of the last time that this happened to me. Usually, a lot of these conversations, you'll be surprised by how positive they are. But if you do find yourself into a situation where it starts to get ugly, you can just take the off ramp and you do not have to feel bad about that. Okay. You don't have to win every argument, you don't have to fight every battle. If you didn't change somebody's mind today, that is totally okay. Okay. You can try again with the next person. Do not let it shake your confidence because there are so many opportunities to try again. So I've got some tips here. You don't have to attend every argument that you're invited to. How many times have we heard that? You don't have to. You get to make the choice to not argue, okay? If somebody is truly dug in, they're not changing their mind and they start to get abusive, you don't have to fix them. Let them be an asshole, okay? That's their problem, not yours. Let it go. It's okay. And there are there are ways that you can do this. So I'm a Southern woman, and we learn all of these little tricks to exit the conversation gracefully. Like, sounds like we really disagree on this. I respect that you've thought about this a lot, and I'm not going to change your mind today, and that's totally okay. And just walk away. You can also say, hey, I really care about you, and I don't want this to hurt our relationship. So why don't we change the subject for now? That is okay. You don't have to engage every single time. As long as you're having healthy political conversations, keep going. But if it's becoming not healthy, then just don't. Just make the choice to not do that. You can. You have the power. But again, don't let that discourage you. It doesn't have to happen all the time, and you can try again the next time. Okay. You can try again with somebody else. Don't let it stop you from having these conversations. Um, Related topic, I do want y'all to show up and be visible about the stuff. I started by telling y'all that to be more open about your politics, and I'm going to close there too. So, Alabama Republicans benefit when people think there are no Republicans. No one ran in District 6 since 2018 as a Democrat. So when I ran, like I said, people would say there are no Democrats in District 6. Like, why are we even bothering here? Well, it turns out there are a lot of Democrats in District 6, over 100,000. 100,000 of your neighbors and your friends and your community members and your family members. And that's just the ones that heard about my campaign and voted. So a lot of people didn't. And imagine if we all started showing up and people started seeing how many of us were out there. And not only that, people were seeing that we're there, but we're also their friends and their family and their neighbors and their coworkers and their community members and their teachers and their church members. And I mean that we're out here, right? Marcia Sturdivant is on this call. She's doing some really cool stuff in Shelby County, and they're going out and doing canned food drives and really helping with the community. And I think that's such a powerful way to be visible in the community because we don't have to hide, right? We can show up and we can be visible in any way that we can, whether that's having a conversation or putting a sign in our yard or doing a canned food drive or just being proud of who we are in the last election or wearing our county Democrat shirt. We have got to do it. We can't hide behind this stuff anymore, right? Because people need to see that we're out there so that they know that they're not alone. Okay. And we talked a lot about seeing the humanity in other people, but when we're showing up, we're also letting people see our humanity, right? Because it's really easy. I saw a comment on AL.com the other day, and this guy said, all Democrats should be euthanized, which is a horrible, ugly thing to say. I think it would be a lot harder for a guy to say something like that if he was standing side by side with you at the soup kitchen or sitting in the pew next to you at church, right? I think it's very easy for people to say those things if they think we don't exist or we're some kind of like weird demon people or something. But if we're out in the community and we're being proud and respectful and kind and empathetic and compassionate and, good neighbors, like we should all be doing anyway, it's a lot harder to say stuff like that. All right. So I'm going to leave you with 5 tips for healthy political conversations. And we've talked about all of this. One, be confident because your values matter. Two, you're just going to assume the common ground when you talk to people, okay? Because we mostly want the same things. I promise you that we do. When you start talking to people, you'll see what I mean. Three, we're going to be curious and not combative. So we're going to go into this by asking people to tell us what they feel. And we're going to listen, right? We're going to ask questions. Four, we're going to keep it person to person. So we're not going to start talking about Republican versus Democrat. We're not going to start doing a bunch of labels and things like that. We're going to talk to each other as neighbors, as friends, as coworkers, as fellow parents. We're going to be we and not us versus them. It's we the people, right? And then finally, like I said, protect your peace. If they want to fight, you do not owe them the energy. Just walk away, and that's okay. And yes, that includes not arguing with people on the internet. I personally struggle with that, as I'm sure that many of you do too. But you don't have to. You can just close Instagram. You can close Facebook. You don't have to attend every argument that you are invited to. Right. So if you follow these steps, you can keep it respectful without getting negative. And you might find that you change a few hearts and minds along the way. So, all right, this is me, Elizabeth Anderson. I hope you'll vote for me in the upcoming election. If you are in District 6, I'll be on the ballot in 2026. I'm really excited about it. There's a QR code if you want to scan it so that I can go have all these political conversations with people all over the state, all over District 6. I want you to have them too, but I'm going to be having a lot of those. And if you're able to donate to my campaign, I can have even more conversations with people and change even more hearts and minds. So that's all I've got for y'all today. Happy to take a few questions if anybody has them.
I
Yeah.
do. I do.
Yes. Go
Uh,
ahead.
uh, I just, do you think it's possible to initiate a conversation about an issue that you're pretty sure the other person feels differently about than you are? Or should you wait for an opportunity that comes up sort of naturally or organically?
I think that you have to kind of know the person a little bit. So if you know that they feel really strongly about this and they get pretty hot about it, then I might wait for it to come up naturally. But if you know that if you feel like you have a good relationship with them and you feel like you can let it come up in the conversation and bring it up with them, then I would go for it. But when you do it and you know for sure that they disagree with you on it, you have to really prepare yourself to listen a lot more than you talk, right? It's like I tell my kids, we got 2 ears and one mouth. So we gotta listen twice as much as we talk. You might have to listen 4 times as much as you talk. And you don't have to be disingenuous in the conversation. You don't have to say, oh, I totally agree with that if you definitely disagree. Like, don't ever do that. Just be honest and open and say, I haven't thought about it that way, and then think about how they're feeling and really try to understand what it is, like how they arrived at their feeling on that issue. Because I think there's a lot of value in that. And a lot of people just want to be heard on things. A lot of times when people seem like they're dug in on stuff, it's really that nobody has listened to them about it. And so if you hear people and you understand what it is that's really bothering them at the deepest level, then I think you can get somewhere with it and you can have a conversation, but you have to listen to them first and you have to let them say their piece and you have to really actually listen because if you've actually listened to them when it's your turn to talk, then you can say, well, I'm so glad that you shared all that stuff with me and I really hadn't thought about it that way. And that hadn't really occurred to me. But this is kind of how I think about it. So I see it just, a little bit differently than you. And this is kind of what I think. How do you feel about that? and you can keep the conversation going. So that's my take on it.
Okay, thanks.
I had one. First, Elizabeth, thank you so much for this. I can't tell you how much I thoroughly enjoy your presentation. Ever since I first heard about it, I've been looking forward to this. One question that I have is, um, you talked about party labels, avoiding it, but also not being ashamed about it.
Yeah.
At what point in the conversation do you interject to that where you say that I'm a Democrat or whatever label that we want to use, kind of thing? Because I mean, I think you say how important it is for people to know that we are Democrats, so that we're not the demon that that extremist calls us.
Mhm.
But I can also see how it can derail a conversation if you say it too early on. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh my gosh, I had this conversation so many times with people. I'm out in the community and I'm handing out my cards to people, and I was actually surprised. Maybe I shouldn't have been surprised about this, but I was surprised by how many people would not even they wouldn't ask a question, they wouldn't read the card, they wouldn't do any they would have this wall up and they would say, "You're a Republican or a Democrat." It kind of happened a lot. And not every time, but it did happen. And so I would say, well, I'm running as a Democrat, but I bet we agree on more than we disagree. So, I would always say, my campaign color is purple because I have my card with me because I really want to represent all people. And here's what that means. So I think it's good to be open and honest about it and say, I'm a Democrat or I'm a leftist or I'm a progressive or, wherever you label yourself. I think it's important to say that, but I think it's also important to not let that define the entire conversation because I was always very much, I'm running as a Democrat. And also, I believe that our elected representatives should represent everybody in the district, and I'm here to listen and learn today. So I want to hear what you care about. So, like I said, just don't let it define the entire because if you start with I'm a Democrat and I'm going home right now to worship Chuck Schumer on my altar, like that's going nowhere. Okay, like it's just not happening at that point. But if you say, yeah, I'm a Democrat and also I want to hear what you have to say. So I think a lot
Okay.
of it is just feeling like making sure that people understand who you are, but that you are also invested in them. Because like 90% of the time, people just want to be heard.
Yeah,
And I
gotcha.
don't
Okay.
think I
Thank
ever
you.
had anybody, I can't think of a single time that I said I'm a Democrat and, did my little spiel. And then somebody was like, well, I automatically hate you. Like most people are not. I think there were maybe a handful of people throughout the entire campaign that might have said something like, no, thank you. And that's going back to the people that we talked about earlier. Like if they're just super dug in, I'm not going to chase them down and be like, no, no, you must take my card and hear my spiel or whatever. If somebody says no, thank you, then walk away. Right? But most people did not do that.
Yes,
Marsha
excellent.
ran
Thank
for
you so
office.
much.
Marsha ran for office. She might have had a similar or different experience, but
I did. I knocked on some doors and had people come out, and we could often find common ground. Uh, what I found is that if I was talking to somebody that I thought was leaned right, um, that it was uncomfortable for them when we
Mhm,
found common ground, and they would deflect to the culture wars.
mhm,
And that was hard for me because I'm such a mama bear and I care about my family members who are in the LGBTQ community. And
mhm.
it was hard for me to not be critical when I felt the deflection happen. That I just struggled with that a lot. So just
I
saying.
felt that a couple of times too. And the way that I ended up approaching it was at one point during the campaign, there was someone who asked me, and they did not know a whole lot about me. And they said, I don't want my kids to learn about LGBTQ stuff at school, and I think it should be banned from school. And this is a major problem for me. And, are you going to make sure that parents have the right to like restrict that, and we keep all that stuff out of schools. And again, they didn't know anything about me. And so what I said to that conversation was, "Oh, well, I'm so glad that you brought that topic up. That's something that I really care a lot about because I myself am a member of the LGBTQ community, and I'm actually the first openly LGBTQ person running for federal office in the state of Alabama. And so that's a topic that, I care a lot about. First of all, that made it very uncomfortable for the person that was talking to me. Unfortunately, I didn't want it for it to, but it did because they were like, we're Southern people, and we're like, oh God, I've been rude now by accident, but because I said that and I said, I'm not saying that to be, make you feel bad or anything, but here's kind of what my perspective is. And here's where I stand on that. And, of course, parents have a right to see what their kids are learning about and understand what their kids are learning about and hear what they're learning about at school. Of course, like we all agree on that. But it's also important for LGBTQ families and those with kids to be able to see their families represented and understand that that's not shameful or bad and there's nothing wrong with that. So kind of that's what my perspective is on it. And we ended up having a really lovely conversation. Now, did I change their mind on that specific issue? I'm not sure if I did, but they voted for me and they know how I'm going to vote. If I were elected, they know how I would vote on that specific issue. And that's kind of what I mean by turning down the heat on some of that stuff, because if we were able to have a really positive conversation on that, and if I were to get elected and I would vote in favor of my side of things, right, making those materials more available, and they know that, but they had such a good conversation with me that they were able to vote for me based on other issues as well. Doesn't that ultimately, progress our cause, right? Like, aren't we ultimately making a step in the right direction, even if I didn't necessarily change their mind on that one specific topic? So, yeah, I think to Marcia's point, a lot of times it can be uncomfortable for people to find out that they agree with you on stuff because they have been told that Democrats and progressives and leftists and socialists and, we're like the devil and we're so bad and evil in every way that it feels shocking for them. But we need to understand and be empathetic to how they're feeling in that moment too, and understand all of the things that they've been told and all of the lies that they've been told, and help them see that we're humans and we also need to understand that they're humans, and try to find where we can come together. And when they deflect to culture war issues, we deflect back to kids table issues. It's a deflection war at that point. This is a good one.
How do you recommend? I know a lot of our volunteers are introverts and have problems initiating conversations, even with someone in the ER. What would be some good opening lines, or how would you suggest they move forward if they want to be more active?
That is actually the hardest question anyone has asked me because I am obviously not an introvert, even remotely. I'm very extroverted. My family will tell you that I'll talk to a brick wall. I would say, I think that if you are nervous, maybe asking questions. So if somebody is saying something or they're talking about some issue, maybe ask them, tell me more, right? And let them do the talking. And then all you've got to do is sit and listen, right? Let them talk. They want to be heard anyway. Most people just honestly want someone to listen to them. And I mean that truly. The majority of people, our society is so isolated sometimes, and we're so pushed into these bubbles that people don't feel heard. And we have lost a lot of community, and people just want to be listened to. And so if you can listen and ask them questions, that might be your in. And I'm not sure how hard that might be for an introvert because it's very easy for me to just jump in and be like, hey, do you want to have a conversation with me? Because I want to have a conversation with everybody. But I might say asking questions.
Okay.
Hmm.
Does anybody else have any questions tonight?
Cheryl, Amanda, y'all good?
Yeah.
I've been,
I have, here's what happens to me. And perhaps you can give me some words of wisdom to restrain myself. I'll be maybe chit-chatting with someone in the grocery store nearby, and then they'll make some joke about it's all Biden's fault or something like that. And they'll be laughing, expecting me to laugh with them because I'm an old white woman. I always, almost always have some zinger that comes to my mind that I just don't restrain. And I laugh while I'm delivering it, but it doesn't get us anywhere. What's a good way to deal with that kind of humor?
I have experienced this many times. Okay, so there are different ways that you can do it. Like I said, you don't have to attend every argument that you're invited to. But that being said, the way that I often approach it will be definitely you don't have to laugh. I mean, I think that goes back to the discomfort conversation because they expect you to laugh because what they're trying to do when they make those jokes is they're trying to connect with you.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they're ultimately trying to do. They're trying to like share an inside joke with you, but you're not on that inside joke, and you don't want to be on that inside joke. So what you can do, and what I often do, and this might be a little bit more argumentative than what we're talking about here today, is don't laugh and just say, "What do you mean by that?" And then they will have to explain what they mean by that. And depending on the severity of what they've just said, they might get increasingly uncomfortable in that conversation. And when they feel that discomfort, sometimes they will shut down. Sometimes they will reflect on what they said, not then, but like way later, they might start reflecting on it. And sometimes they'll keep their mouth shut the next time. And that's okay too. Right? I'll give you an example of this that I experienced. I'm obviously like a white suburban mom. Okay. I recognize, I know what I look like. And so when my kid was in elementary school, we went to the Meet the Teacher Day, and her class had a lot of Hispanic students in it. And this other mom kind of walks over to me and says, "I hope that our kids sit together." And I said, "Oh, well, this white mom." And I said, "Oh, that'd be so nice if our kids, sat together. What do you mean?" And she said, "Oh, well, I hope our kids don't have to sit with those other kids." And I said, "Oh, well, what do you like? What other kids?" And so she starts kind of backtracking, right? Because I knew exactly what she was talking about, and she knew exactly what she was talking about. She starts kind of backtracking, and she says, well, I just some of them might not speak English really well." And I said, "Oh, you think so? A lot these kids seem really nice and they're so cute, like all of the kids in this class, and they're in like we're in second grade now, and I bet everybody speaks English, but even if they don't, wouldn't that be so nice for our kids to be exposed to other languages and cultures?" And she like really by this point is like backtracked all the way. Like I think she was like shrunk so tiny at this point. And she says, and she's getting like so nervous. And like, she's really sweating at this point. But at no point did I like hit her with any kind of zingers. I didn't try to argue with her. I didn't get into a fight with her about it, which I very well could have. Maybe I should have. Maybe that would have been the better approach. But instead I said, "Well, what do you mean by that?" Over and over and over again. And then told her kind of how I felt about it, how look at all these nice kids. I hope they all do get to sit together. And, just really tried to show her that I disagreed with her in as nice a way as I possibly could and as politely as I possibly could. And I don't know if I changed her mind, but I know that she didn't ever say anything like that to me again. And I would be willing to bet you that she really thought long and hard before she made some weird racist comment to somebody else again.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's a desirable outcome.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you.
So,
That would help.
what do you mean? What do you mean by that? Exactly.
Amanda,
Okay.
you had a question?
Well, I think I just have the opposite issue. I'm an oversharer and I tend to talk way too much. So my thing is I don't know how to reel it in without it's just going too far sometimes.
Um,
But
yeah, I do a lot of backspacing on Facebook replies. Oh, go ahead though.
no, I mean that was it. Like, I mean, I was driving Uber for a while and I had all kinds of people in my car and you know, I would have conversations with everyone and usually when the subject of Republican versus Democrat comes up, I just they'll say, "How can you, because of this, because of that?" And I'm like, "Well, I personally lean to the social services because my son was very sickly as a child, and I would not have been able to afford health care. My sister, her kids would not have had health care or food. My great nephews and nieces would not have health care or food, and I think that's important." And I said, "My nephews work." But
Yeah.
there's not enough to pay the rent to, and buy food and have, pay for a car to get back and forth to work. And I said, it's just very expensive unless the whole family works. And, but, they have to have somebody to watch the kids and then that's daycare. So I always lean into the social services, usually about how that is. And then also, my son, he's biracial, so I'm normally like, if somebody starts talking racist things or jokes, I'm like, yeah, I don't find that funny. I said, my son's biracial, and if I'm not standing up for him, who is? Who can I expect to stand up for my kid if I don't speak out? And so I've had a lot of uncomfortable conversations, but there's only been one time that the guy before he got out of my car, he says, "Well, the only thing I can say is if a man is trying to be a woman, that's not how he was born, and I disagree with that." And I said, "You know what?" I said, "You have the right to your opinion just like I do." I said, "I disagree with your opinion." And I said, "You disagree with mine." And I said, "But we can agree to disagree and not have and not hate each other." So I mean, but yeah, I tend to overshare and like I'm doing now and take up way too much time. So I need to learn how to nip it a little bit, be more concise, I guess.
I don't know if you do, Amanda. I actually think that's a really valuable way to have these conversations. And I do the same thing. So, if you haven't heard me speak before and you don't know anything about me, I grew up below the poverty line. And I talk about it like nonstop. Marcia's on the call and she's probably heard me talk about it 9,000 times at this point. But, when I was growing up, I was on SNAP benefits. We called them food stamps at the time. And free lunches, and I had a Pell Grant that helped me get to college. I literally did not go to the dentist until I was 23 years old, like because we just didn't have health care, and it was really hard. And so I often share that story, and I'm probably an overshare also about a lot of these topics, but I think it's important for people to understand kind of where you're coming from on these things and understand why you have a different viewpoint. So when people say, oh my God, these horrible things, they'll say stuff like kids who are on free lunches need to be required to clean up the lunchroom because they need to understand the value of hard work. And you're like, well, I grew up on free lunches and I worked really hard. I was not, some lazy freeloader because my family couldn't afford food for us, right? And I think that's part of empathy. This kind of goes back to what I was saying about how it's a two-way street, we have to look for other people's humanity, but we also have to help them see our humanity as well and how we arrived at these things. I talked to a trans politician recently and she was telling me how difficult that was because she talked to someone, she called somebody and they said they didn't know anything about her. and they said, well, I just don't believe in all this trans stuff. And I don't believe that people should be able to get gender affirming surgery. And she said, and she told me, she was like, man, I was so conflicted in the moment because I was like, well, I could argue with this person, or I could just move on, and change the conversation, or I could tell my story. And so she said, she made that decision in the moment to say, well, I'm glad you said that because I am trans. And here's what my story was like. And here's how it benefited my life. And it was so important for me to be able to have gender affirming care when I was growing up, even as a minor. And here's what that meant for me. And so she made the decision to be vulnerable and tell her story. And that person ended up donating quite a lot of money to her and also voting for her. And, that was a person that conversation could have gone really badly. But because she was willing to be vulnerable and share, she was able to help them see her humanity. And then she was also able to take a moment to see their humanity, because a lot of times people just need to you just need to help people on their journey of understanding. Most people are there are bad people out there for sure, but most people don't wake up every day and think to themselves like, I'm going to be evil, right? A lot of times people have just not experienced things or heard things and don't understand. And so we can help them to understand, and telling your story is a great way to do that.
Yeah, and one other thing I was gonna share when you were talking about the lady saying the kids not being able to speak English, maybe. I've had people say that to me about immigrants and needing to learn our language and this, that, and another. And I asked them if they ever traveled to a foreign country. And I said, I had my own personal driver when I was in Japan one time, and I'm sitting here because that was before internet, and I'm sitting here with a Japanese dictionary trying to help talk to him, and he's looking at me like I'm crazy, and he was very polite to me,
Yeah.
and I'm like, do you know how hard it is to speak Japanese?
Yes.
I even took lessons before I went, and all I could say was, please, thank you, bathroom and water. It's like, so how would you expect someone coming to this country just to know automatically? And they're fleeing, most of them are fleeing worse. They're taking, a risk to leave their home to come here because their risk could be more detrimental than what they're leaving. And so it has to be pretty bad, knowing the risk. So anyway, but I wanted to share that about the language thing. But thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. It's hard out there. I think a lot of people have not thought about that. And it goes back to the empathy conversation, and we have to ourselves develop empathy for other people and think about where they're coming from and understand what it is that they're really worried about, and understand how they arrived at that, thought process, even if we totally disagree with them. Because if we can understand how they got there, then we can help them overcome it. Do you know what I mean? And we can help them see some empathy in, the way that we feel about things, or the way that it really is. Like the immigrant conversation. I think, a lot of times when you're talking to suburban white people in some of these wealthier communities, they're not necessarily thinking about those things every day, or they're not necessarily talking to a lot of immigrants who have experienced a lot of hardship in their lives. And so we can help them to understand that stuff, I think is really important, and help them to see what they're missing.
Well, I want to extend a sincere thank you to you, Elizabeth Anderson, tonight for sharing your time, your insight, and your passion with us. We at U of L truly appreciate the work that you're doing and the perspective that you brought to this session. And just as a reminder, there will be no Blue School in December, so we can all take time to rest and enjoy the holidays. But we will be back together on January 20th, 2026, when Tabitha Eisner will join us for a timely and important session on who runs the Alabama Democratic Party, understanding the Alabama State Democratic Executive Committee. We look forward to seeing you all in the new year. As always, UW is powered by volunteers. So if you're interested in helping out, please connect with us. And with that, have a wonderful evening and a wonderful holiday.
Thank you, Elizabeth, so much.
Thank
Great
you,
presentation.
everybody. This was fun.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Good night.